The gun was shaking, but the hand holding it wasn't. That was the part that made my stomach sink. I'd seen enough dangerous men in my life to know when fear was the thing keeping them from pulling the trigger and when it wasn't. "Step back, sir," the guard barked, his voice a brittle mixture of authority and something darker. I wasn't stepping back. Not this time. "My name's Daniel Cross, founder and CEO of a tech logistics startup that just signed a $2.5 million contract. I was here to deposit the first payment me company's biggest win so far. And in this shining, marble-walled bank in downtown Atlanta, where smiles cost more than rent, I was standing frozen in the middle of the lobby with a Glock 17 aimed at my chest. Customers had scattered toward the walls, some ducking behind the line dividers. The bank manager, a thin man in a steel-gray suit, stood near the glass offices, looking like someone had just asked him to jump into traffic. And the guard stocky, pale, with the kind of jowls you see in men who've been living on fast food, and resentment had his feet planted wide, his eyes locked on me. "What's in the briefcase?" he demanded. "My company's payroll deposit," I said, carefully enunciating every word. "You can open it right here, in front of everyone." His lip curled. "You think I'm stupid? I know drug money when I see it." A wave of disbelief rolled through me. There was laughter from someone in the crowd, sharp, awkward laughter that died instantly under the guard's glare. I was in a three-piece suit worth more than his annual bonus, wearing a Patek Philippe my father had given me when I landed my first investor. And somehow, in his mind, I was a drug dealer. Maybe this would have gone differently if I'd kept my mouth shut. But something about the way he said it, casual, certain, like my life's work could be tossed into the trash heap of every lazy stereotype, burned in my chest. "Let me guess," I said quietly. "Black man. Money. Must be crime, right?" His grip tightened on the gun. I swear I heard the leather of his belt creak. "Daniel," it was Maya's voice. She was my operations manager, the one who handled our finances. She'd been behind me in line, holding a folder of invoices. Now she stepped forward, hands raised. "We have bank accounts here. His name is on them. Check your system." "Ma'am, step back," the guard snapped, never looking away from me. A hush settled over the room. Every sound seemed magnified: the hum of the AC, the faint hiss of a coffee machine behind the teller counter, the distant siren somewhere outside. "You're making a mistake," I told him. "A mistake that's going to cost you everything." For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes: hesitation, maybe even doubt. But then the manager moved. Not toward me, not toward the guard, but toward the phone on the wall. The guard's head jerked toward him. "Don't call anyone," he growled. And just like that, I understood. This wasn't about bank protocol. This wasn't even about me. This man had made up his mind before I walked through the door. He'd built a narrative in his head, and he was ready to defend it with his job, his freedom, maybe even his life. But he didn't know there was a camera, several cameras watching everything. From the far corner, a customer in a denim jacket slowly pulled out her phone. The guard noticed, barked at her to put it away, but she kept recording. Brave. Or maybe just tired of the same story playing on repeat in America. My mind was working fast. If I made one wrong move, my name would be a hashtag by nightfall. If I played it right, if I kept breathing, kept standing, this moment could destroy him, not me. I shifted my weight slightly, enough to make him tense. His finger twitched near the trigger. "That's assault with a deadly weapon," I said evenly. "You know that, right?" The crowd was dead silent now. I could feel every gaze pressing on us, their collective heartbeat syncing with mine. "Shut your mouth," the guard hissed. Maya's voice cut through the tension. Daniel didn't. But I wasn't going to be quiet. Not anymore. "You think you're protecting this bank," I told him. "You're just protecting your prejudice." That was when the manager made his move. Not toward me, not toward the gun, but toward the guard himself. His hand landed on the man's shoulder. "Put it down," he said, voice low but steady. The guard didn't move. For a full 5 seconds, it was just the three of us in a frozen triangle, the manager trying to defuse, me refusing to flinch, and the guard gripping the gun like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. Then sirens. Loud. Close. His eyes darted toward the front glass doors. "Your call," I said softly. That's when everything shifted. The wail of the sirens didn't just echo through the glass doors, it cut through the guard's bravado like a blade. His jaw tightened, but his stance faltered for the first time. 2 black and white cruisers screeched to a stop outside the bank, their light bars throwing red and blue flashes across the marble floor. Through the glass, I caught sight of 3 uniformed officers stepping out, hands near their holsters, eyes scanning the interior. The guard took a step back, but the muzzle of the Glock stayed trained on me. "You're not going anywhere," he muttered. "No," I said, "but you are." The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the officers rushed in. The lead officer, tall, with a shaved head and a voice like sandpaper, immediately clocked the scene. "Weapon down now." The guard's head snapped toward him. "He's got suspicious funds, could be laundering, could be." I said, "Weapon down." The officer's tone brooked no debate. For a long, brittle moment, I thought the guard might double down, the way people do when they've convinced themselves they're the hero of their own story. But something in the lead officer's stare broke through. Slowly, almost theatrically, he lowered the Glock, placing it on the floor. "Hands behind your head," the officer ordered. "You can't be serious." "Now." The guard complied, muttering under his breath, the sound low and venomous. The second officer, a Latino woman with her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, cuffed him quickly, reading him his rights. Around us, the bank customers began to stir, the oppressive tension breaking like a fever. Some whispered to each other, others pulled out phones, recording the aftermath. I didn't move. My body was a storm held together by sheer will. The lead officer approached me. "Sir, you all right?" I looked him dead in the eyes. "I was until I walked in here." He gave a short nod, as if to say he understood more than he was willing to voice in public. "We'll need your statement." Maya stepped up beside me, her hand lightly brushing my arm, a small, grounding gesture. "We'll both give statements. And we want the security footage pulled right now." The bank manager flinched at that. His gaze darted toward the security cameras mounted in each corner. "There's protocol." "No," Maya cut in sharply. "There's evidence. You have a duty to preserve it." The female officer spoke up. "Sir, if you tamper with or delete any part of that footage, it's obstruction of justice. You understand?" The manager swallowed. Of course. The guard was being let out now, his wrists locked in steel, his expression twisted into something between rage and humiliation. Our eyes met as he passed, and for the first time since this started, I saw uncertainty there. Maybe even fear. "You just ended your career," I told him quietly. He sneered, but it didn't land. "Not anymore." Half an hour later, I was sitting in one of the glass-walled offices, the afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, casting stripes across the desk. The officers had taken our statements, reviewed the footage, and confirmed what every witness in that lobby had seen. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it felt like something heavier, a weight that came from knowing this wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Maya was pacing the small space, her heels clicking softly on the carpet. "We should call the press," she said suddenly. "Get ahead of it. Make sure the narrative is ours, not theirs." I leaned back in the chair, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the glass. My suit was still crisp, but I felt wrung out. "You think anyone's going to believe I was just making a deposit?" "They'll believe it if they see the video," she said. "That guard's face when you challenged him? That's the story. The way he held that gun, like, you were some kind of animal." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I realized she'd been holding her own anger in check. Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. The lead officer stepped in, holding a small evidence bag with my briefcase inside. "Funds are intact," he said. "We're logging this for the report, but you'll have it back today." "Thanks," I said flatly. He hesitated, then added, "Look, I know this doesn't erase what happened, but there are people watching. The DA's office will see the footage. That matters." I met his gaze. "It matters that he's not holding a gun anymore. But what about the next one?" He didn't have an answer for that, just a slow nod before he left the room. By the time we walked out of the bank, the sun was lower, the streets busier, and the crowd outside thicker. News vans had already parked along the curb, their telescopic masts reaching toward the sky like silent sentinels. The moment I stepped onto the sidewalk, microphones were thrust toward me. "Mr. Cross, what happened inside? Do you think this was racially motivated? Will you press charges?" Maya's hand found my elbow. "Your call," she murmured. I looked at the knot of cameras, the strangers staring at me, waiting for a soundbite that would fit neatly into the evening broadcast. And then I thought of the guard's face, the certainty in his voice when he accused me, the way the bank manager froze rather than intervene. "This isn't just about me," I said finally. "It's about the fact that a man with a gun and a badge felt entitled to decide who I was based on nothing but the color of my skin. If I didn't have witnesses or if the cameras had been off, maybe I wouldn't be standing here. Maybe I'd be in a morgue." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. "I'm pressing charges," I continued, "and I'm going to make sure every second of that footage is public. Because the next black man who walks into a bank to cash a check shouldn't have to wonder if he's walking into a trap." Maya's grip on my arm tightened in quiet solidarity. Somewhere behind the press scrum, someone started clapping. A single, slow clap that built into a ripple, then a wave, until dozens of people were applauding. Not for me, exactly, but for the truth being said out loud. I didn't smile. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man who'd survived something that never should have happened. And I knew the fight was just getting started. By the next morning, the footage was everywhere. Clips from the bank's security cameras played on a loop across cable news, intercut with shaky cell phone video from customers who had been there. The guard's face, twisted in aggression, filled every screen, his gun aimed squarely at my chest. My phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters, friends, strangers from across the country. Some offered support. Others sent messages that dripped with venom, blaming me for ruining a good man's life. At 8:17 a.m., I was on a live video call with my attorney, James Whitfield, a sharp, unflinching civil rights lawyer who'd taken on some of the biggest police misconduct cases in Georgia. He was leaning forward in his office chair, tie slightly askew, eyes glinting with something between determination and hunger. "Daniel," he said, "this isn't just a lawsuit, it's a reckoning. We're talking false imprisonment, assault with a deadly weapon, violation of your civil rights. And given the publicity, the bank will want this gone yesterday." "I don't want it gone," I replied. "I want it public. I want it on record." James nodded. "Then we go loud. We subpoena the guard's personnel file, any prior complaints, every piece of training he's hater failed to have. We find out if this was his first time pulling something like this, or just the first time someone caught him. My gut told me it wasn't his first. Men like that don't wake up one morning and suddenly decide to draw a gun on a customer for no reason." By noon, James had filed the paperwork. The bank issued a statement calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding and confirming the guard's suspension pending investigation. They didn't say his name, but the internet found it in hours. Gregory Pike, 54 years old, former sheriff's deputy from a rural Georgia county. That's when the real flood began. On social media, former coworkers, ex-neighbors, even people who'd been stopped by him in the past started sharing stories. A black delivery driver claimed Pike had detained him for over an hour outside a gated community where the man was delivering furniture until a resident confirmed the order. A Latina woman described being accused of shoplifting at a hardware store where Pike had worked security, only to be released when cameras proved her innocence. Each story was a nail, hammered into the coffin of his reputation. By day 3, one of the local news stations aired an interview with a former deputy who'd served with Pike in the sheriff's department. He didn't mince words. He had a chip on his shoulder about certain folks, the man said. We'd get calls, and if the suspect was black or brown, Greg would start running his mouth about cleaning up the streets. Got him written up more than once. The sheriff's department had no comment. Meanwhile, the bank was trying to contain the fire. Their PR team reached out to James, offering a private settlements even figures if I agreed to sign a non-disclosure agreement. He put the offer on speakerphone so I could hear. "I'm not signing anything," I said. The voice on the other end hesitated. "Mr. Cross, this kind of publicity isn't good for anyone involved." "You mean it's not good for you?" I cut in. "I'm not interested in keeping this quiet so you can go back to business as usual." They hung up without another word. James smirked. "They'll be back." A week later, I was standing outside the Fulton County Courthouse, flanked by James on one side and Maya on the other. Reporters swarmed as we filed the civil suit not just against Pike, but against the bank itself for enabling and employing him despite what we now knew about his history. "This isn't about a single bad actor," James told the cameras. "It's about the systems that protect them, the hiring processes that ignore red flags, the corporate cultures that would rather write checks than write new policies." Inside, the paperwork hit the clerk's desk with a satisfying thud. The case was set to draw national attention, and we knew the defense would fight tooth and nail. But the more Pike's past surfaced, the harder it would be for them to spin. That night, I sat in my apartment, the city lights spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the glass of bourbon in my hand. I kept thinking about that moment in the bank, how still the world had felt, how close I'd been to becoming another headline. And I thought about the people who hadn't been so lucky, whose stories ended without cameras, without witnesses. I picked up my phone and opened the video again. In slow motion, you could see everything. The flare of suspicion in Pike's eyes the moment he spotted me, the way his stance shifted, aggressive, the exact second his finger curled near the trigger when I spoke up. Watching it was like staring into the anatomy of prejudice. Not loud, not foaming at the mouth, just cold, mechanical, certain. And now, thanks to those few minutes on tape, he was facing the collapse of everything he'd built his identity on. Over the next month, the case grew teeth. Pike's attorneys tried to argue that he'd been acting in good faith to protect the bank from potential fraud. But cross-examination tore that apart, especially when the footage showed him ignoring every offer I made to open my briefcase, check my ID, or verify my accounts. The bank's legal team shifted tactics, attempting to throw Pike under the bus entirely. We could not have foreseen this behavior, they claimed in court filings. But James produced the prior complaints, the hiring records, the lack of follow-up on documented incidents. It was brutal. And every day, the press was recovering not just the legal details, but the broader conversation about racial profiling in corporate security. The more Pike tried to justify himself, the worse he looked. He gave a local TV interview insisting he didn't see color and would have done the same thing to anyone. But when the reporter asked why he'd never drawn his weapon on any white customers in 20 years of security work, he stumbled over his answer. That clip went viral too. By the time the trial date was set, Pike was a pariah. The sheriff's department distanced itself completely. His own attorney reportedly advised him to settle to avoid a public humiliation in front of a jury, but his pride wouldn't let him. Pride had gotten him into this. Pride would bury him. And I was going to make sure the coffin was nailed shut. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and fresh coffee. The air was thick with expectation, the kind that makes you sit straighter in your seat without even realizing it. Pike sat at the defense table, wearing a navy suit that didn't quite fit, his tie slightly askew. He avoided looking at me. His attorney, a clean-cut man with the practiced confidence of someone used to spinning the worst facts into tolerable truths, shuffled papers in front of him. The judge, a sharp-eyed black woman named Judge Harrington, entered, and the room rose. Her gaze swept over everyone like a searchlight before she took her seat. James leaned toward me. This is it. We don't need a knockout punch, just let him talk long enough to hang himself. We didn't have to wait long. After the bank's HR director gave reluctant testimony confirming that Pike's record had multiple prior complaints, James called Pike himself to the stand. He walked up slowly, shoulders squared, trying to project dignity. From the first question, James's tone was deceptively mild. Mr. Pike, in your statement to police, you claimed you suspected Mr. Cross was carrying illicit funds. Correct? Yes, Pike said firmly. Did you see any drugs? No. Any weapons? No. Any behavior that would suggest he was committing a crime? Pike hesitated. He was acting suspicious. James tilted his head. Suspicious how? Pike glanced at the jury, as if appealing to common sense. He had a briefcase. He looked nervous. James let the silence stretch. A briefcase, he repeated. In a bank. A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the gallery. Pike flushed. You're twisting my words. I'm using your words, Mr. Pike, James said smoothly. Now, you've been a security guard for nearly 2 decades. How many times in that period have you drawn your weapon on a white customer carrying a briefcase? I don't keep count. Not even once, correct? Pike's jaw tightened. That's not the point. Oh, I think it is. James stepped closer. You claim you don't see color, but you saw enough to decide Mr. Cross was a criminal before he spoke a single word. Isn't that right? Pike's eyes darted to his attorney. I was doing my job. James didn't let him breathe. Your job was to protect people, not endanger them. Your job was to de-escalate, not pull a gun on a man making a deposit. Your job was to assess threats based on evidence, not skin tone. Tell me, Mr. Pike, did you ever once, in that entire confrontation, ask Mr. Cross for identification before pointing your weapon? The pause was damning. No. James turned to the jury. No further questions. The defense tried to patch the damage, but Pike had already driven the nail halfway into his own coffin. The bank's attorneys fared no better, their attempts to shift blame undercut by their own internal emails. James had subpoenaed showing they'd been warned about Pike's conduct years ago. By the time closing arguments came, the room was heavy with the inevitability of what was coming. James stood before the jury, his voice low but carrying. "This isn't just about Daniel Cross," he said. "This is about a country where walking into a bank with dark skin can be treated like walking into a crime scene. It's about systems that keep putting guns in the hands of men like Gregory Pike and telling them they're the first and last line of defense against a danger that exists only in their imagination. Today, you can send a message that this is not protection. This is prejudice, armed and dangerous." When the jury filed out, the room buzzed with tension. They were gone for less than 2 hours. On the claims of assault with a deadly weapon, false imprisonment, and violation of civil rights, the forewoman read, "We find the defendant, Gregory Pike, liable." Pike's head dropped. The forewoman continued, "We award the plaintiff, Daniel Cross, compensatory damages in the amount of $2.3 million and punitive damages in the amount of $5 million. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I didn't move. Not at first. James squeezed my shoulder, and Maya, sitting just behind me, exhaled hard enough that I could hear it over the murmurs. The judge's gavel came down once. "Court is adjourned." Pike's attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but Pike didn't respond. He sat frozen, staring at nothing, the weight of what he'd lost settling onto him like wet cement. I stood, buttoning my jacket. As I walked past the defense table, Pike finally looked up at me. His eyes were hollow. "You did this to yourself?" I said quietly. Outside, the courthouse steps were a wall of cameras and microphones. The verdict had already spread. I could see it in the way people looked at me as if I'd won something bigger than money. "This isn't the end," I told the press. "I'm donating a large portion of the damages to organizations that fight racial profiling and reform corporate security training. Because this was never just about me winning a case. It's about making sure the next man doesn't have to fight it at all." Reporters shouted follow-ups, but I didn't linger. Maya and I walked to the waiting car. Inside, the noise faded, replaced by the hum of the engine and the quiet relief that comes after months of holding your breath. "You nailed his coffin shut," Maya said softly. "No," I replied. "He nailed it himself. I just made sure everyone saw the lid close." 2 weeks later, a package arrived at my office. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a clipping from a local paper announcing that Gregory Pike had filed for bankruptcy and lost his home. I stared at it for a long moment, then folded it once and dropped it into the shredder. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. And in that courtroom, in front of the world, he'd been forced to face what he was. That was enough. And yet, I still think about that day in the bank. I think about how fast things can turn, how a man's life can pivot on the biases of another. I think about the quiet courage of the customer who kept recording and the bank manager's hesitation that almost cost me my life. Mostly, I think about the silence in that lobby, a moment when a trigger pull was the only thing standing between me and a headstone. It's not a silence I'll ever forget, and I'll make damn sure the world doesn't either. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.